The starting point of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is located on the coastline of the German federal state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. Therefore, the stance of this region's authorities is crucial, according to the German newspaper Handelsblatt. The minister-president of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, Manuela Schwesig, emphasized that the issue of resuming and launching the Russian pipeline will not be considered in the near future. Her statement comes in response to reports in several media outlets claiming that Moscow is lobbying in the United States for a restart of Nord Stream.
Germany has had a clear rule from the very beginning: Nord Stream 2 will not be certified if Russia crosses the red line. With its aggressive war against Ukraine, Russia has significantly crossed that red line. This threatens peace in Europe. Therefore, I believe that in today's circumstances, sending such signals is absolutely unacceptable. Manuela Schwesig, Minister-President of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, in a comment to the Handelsblatt newspaper.
The German government has confirmed that there are no grounds to discuss the resumption of Russian gas supplies to the country. According to German media, citing a government spokesperson, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will soon present her plan to phase out Russian energy imports. The coalition agreement of the new Bundestag should include a refusal to resume operation of the Nord Stream pipeline, says Ruprecht Polenz, a member of the Christian Democratic Union. Meanwhile, Julia Berlinden, a politician of the Alliance 90, the Greens, believes that Germany should completely stop importing Russian energy and transition to alternative suppliers. According to her, the future German government must accelerate the development of renewable energy sources.
They are very clear about it. They don't need Nord Stream anymore because they have made huge efforts to eliminate their dependence on Russian gas. Negotiations between Russia and the US are ongoing. Russia has offered numerous preferences and business opportunities for American companies. This includes Nord Stream 2, Arctic oil and gas fields, and rare earth metals. Nord Stream 2 is critical for Russia because Gazprom is essentially bankrupt.
After losing the European market due to Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Gazprom's foreign currency reserves have melted. According to Russian accounting standards, by the end of 2024, a company's head office reserves had shrunk more than fivefold. Putin's attempt to replace the European market with China has also failed. Negotiations over the construction of the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline have been put on hold. However, the most damaging blow to Gazprom has been Ukraine's refusal to extend the gas transit contract through its territory.
According to financial reports based on Russian accounting standards, Gazprom's parent company suffered a net loss of 1 trillion rubles in 2024, with 192 billion rubles lost from sales. Exports to Europe reached 32 billion cubic meters, only 4 billion cubic meters more than in 2023, when gas shipments collapsed to their lowest level since the late 1970s, from the Moscow Times publication.
Sanctions targeting Russia's energy sector have proven to be the most effective, according to the White House. Revenue from oil and gas export has historically been a cornerstone of the Russian state budget. To force Putin to the negotiation table, Washington is prepared to further tighten restrictions on Russia, stated U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent. According to him, President Donald Trump has instructed him to draft a list of potential sanctions should additional pressure on Moscow be required. Reported by Katarina Bastun, Christina Dombrovska, UATV News.
According to data from the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation, the federal budget deficit for the first 2 months of 2025 amounted to 2,007 billion rubles. This is despite the government's planning an annual deficit nearly half of that amount. The significant budget shortfall is explained by enormous expenditures. In January and February 2025, state treasury expenses reached 8 trillion rubles. A large portion of this money was spent by the Kremlin on continuing the war against Ukraine.
In the first 2 months alone, they spent half of the pre-war budget of the entire Russian Federation. The war requires a huge increase in spending, and you can see how strong this pressure is on them.
The National Wealth Fund, which the Kremlin created in 2008 to stabilize the economy during times of crisis, is also shrinking. Since the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, it has decreased their hold, after 6.5 trillion rubles was spent to patch up budget gaps and support state corporations amid escalating sanctions pressure.
By increasing military spending to its highest level since the Soviet era, Russian authorities have spent more than 20 trillion rubles over 3 years on weapons production and payments to contract soldiers recruited to the front lines. This has led to the creation of a money bubble, not seen in the country since the 2000s, followed by an inflation surge. In an attempt to curb this inflation, the central bank raised the key interest rate to a 22-year high of 21%. Meanwhile, budget reserves are nearing depletion. The accumulated budget deficit over 3 years has reached 10 trillion rubles, and the government has spent 2/3 of the National Wealth Fund's available resources to cover it. From the Moscow Times publication.
Another lifeline for the Kremlin, oil and gas revenues, started leaking after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The price of Russian oil fluctuates daily but is gradually approaching a critical point for the budget. Sanctions pressure from the US, EU and UK on Russia's so-called shadow fleet is also having an impact. Russia's largest operator, the company Sovcomflot, lost half of these profits in 2024 due to Western restrictions.
Oil and gas revenues in the Russian budget decreased by almost 4% in January-February compared to the previous year. Even though oil prices weren't very high last year, this had an impact. We saw that discounts on Russian oil were increasing, and the price of Urals oil was around $60 or lower. So, significant damage has been done to Russian oil and gas revenues in the first months of the year. The International Energy Agency reports that in February, oil and petroleum product export revenues fell by about $3 billion compared to the previous year, and that's noticeable.
In this context, even Putin has forced to publicly acknowledge the economic issues in Russia. He advised the government and the central bank to work delicately in order to avoid the collapse of the Russian economy.
Business is forced to tighten its belts due to the actions of the authorities. Starting this year, the profit tax has been increased from 20% to 25%. More than 10,000 enterprises surveyed by the central bank in January identified the increased influence of credit interest rates and economic uncertainty as factors limiting their investment activity. Minister of Finance Anton Siluanov called his responsible budget one of the measures currently being implemented by the central bank and the government to slightly cool the economy in order to reduce inflation, so that the key interest rate could be lowered. From the Moscow Times publication.
High interest rates are also detrimental to the Ministry of Finance, experts explain. The cost of subsidizing interest rates on concessional loans and servicing national debt rise proportionally as the interest rates increase. In 2025, the Russian government plans to spend over 3 trillion rubles on these expenses. In practice, this amount may grow as the central bank loses control over the economic situation in the country. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavis, Larissa Petruk, UATV News.